Welcome to Be Heard, a new LinkedIn Live series and podcast to promote change-making women. I'm Rachel Marano, co-founder and managing partner of Pivot Point Consulting, a Vaco company. Be Heard is a powerful platform for leaders and aspiring leaders across all industries. And we are excited to have Teresa Sparks here today as our guest. Teresa is the former CFO and EVP of Envision Healthcare, and she is currently serving as a board member and audit committee chair at Harrow Health, as well as a board member at Quality Metric. And she is here to tell us her story today. Welcome to Be Heard, Teresa.
Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate it.
Glad to have you here. So I'll be asking 7 questions today over the next 19 minutes. Okay. And we are going to be discussing your story. And the purpose of the 19 minutes is actually to celebrate the 19th Amendment that gave women the right to vote. So let's get started.
Okay, perfect.
All right, great. So my first question to you, really want to hear about your journey, your path. And so, during what transition did you learn and grow the most, and why?
Well, this is probably no surprise that I would point to motherhood. You may hear that from other women, and hopefully it doesn't sound duplicative, because really each woman's journey and how we navigate with motherhood and through the professional waters, if you will all be different, will all be unique. For me, I became a mother about 28 years ago for the first time. And I was working at Deloitte, and I was in the Nashville practice office here as an auditor. And ironically, Deloitte had just launched a women's initiative movement, primarily focused on really creating a culture where the best talent chooses to work. And they to their credit, they really realized they had 2 issues to address. One was the high rate of female attrition within the firm, and the second was the underrepresentation of leadership, women in leadership positions. So I was one of the very first women who participated in the program and actually worked in a flex schedule at Deloitte for several years. I believe it was one of the most impactful initiatives of the time that really changed that organization's culture. And just as important, it really became a model for other organizations. And it was perfect for me.
Yeah, that sounds like an incredible program. And so you were one of the first women to engage with that. And how did that work for you? I mean, how did you manage that?
It was, I was definitely a pioneer. This is back in the day. I'm really going to date myself, but no cell phones, no email was not a thing. Yeah. So literally I would call in every day at 8:00 in the morning. I would talk to the administrator, the executive assistant who is administering the schedule, and I would just check in and say, hey, is there anything going on today that I'm, need to be made aware of? Here's my schedule. And, really the onus was on me to make that work. I had great support. The firm was very supportive, but I couldn't just sit back and, I had to make it work. I had to put in the effort because it was a privilege for me to be able to have this time with my son and to have this flex time available to me.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's incredible. And organizations that embrace that, I think it's so important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. That's interesting. So next question, tell us a story about, tell us a story that made the biggest difference in your life. So, an impactful time, a story that really either changed your life or made a difference.
That's a good question. There's a lot of them, but I would say one of the biggest decisions that my husband and I made, we started opening our home to young people who needed a place to stay for whatever reason. And there was a vast array of reasons. Our son was probably 14, 15 at the time. And long story short, there ended up being about 15 kids who lived with us at various times over a 10-year period of time. And all of them were boys, with the exception of one girl. So there was a girl in the mix. And through a series of events, she became ours. And so we had ourselves a beautiful 17-year-old bouncing baby girl. She had some challenges with the juvenile court system that we had to work through, and quite frankly, a lot of hormones and, and things like that. But fast forward to today, she is a college graduate. She has her degree in social work, and she's married and expecting their first child in April. So wow. That was definitely a difference maker in our lives.
My goodness. Well, yeah. Very inspiring and incredible, opening your home and your heart, and obviously balancing that with career and being a mom, just incredible. So very, very inspirational there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's been more of a blessing to us than it could ever be to them, I'm sure.
No, I can only imagine. So what's the single most important question leaders should ask themselves? I mean, you've been a leader for a long time, managing teams and being an executive in spaces. What would you say to other women and to other professionals that you think the most important question leaders should be asking themselves?
Truly, I think the most important question is, are you willing to serve? And for me, I think serving is leadership in its just simplest form. When you're serving others, you have, you got to put your pretense aside. You've got to put other, personal goals and aspirations, and you're truly focused on your team, and you're focused on others. And I just think you have to be willing to serve, and that is pretty much, there's a lot of things you can go from there, and a lot of leadership lessons. But for me, that I think is, if you boil it all down, that's the number one question you should be asking yourself.
Servant leadership. That's fantastic. I mean, I think it leans into so many other things: collaboration and inspiration. Right. And creating more of an open environment. So I think that's fantastic. Servant leadership for sure. Great. So game changer lesson. What's your game changer lesson that you learned over the course of your career? You've had a lot of different experiences, which, we would love to hear more about. But what do you think that one game changer lesson would be that you could share with us?
Well, so I've spent the majority of my career as a CFO, and this is a good question. When I left Deloitte, I left to go to a startup company. Had a stint in between, but basically went to a startup company, which so many lessons learned there. When you move up the scale of growing and scaling a company from 5 million to 10 million to 25, there's so many inherent lessons learned. We did that. We grew the company. We scaled the business. We completed an IPO in 2004 timeframe. Several years later, we completed a leveraged buyout to take the company private. Wow. We sold the company. We went through another IPO, completed another public offering. Long story short, by the time I exited, the company had roughly $2 billion in revenue. So my stint was 0 to 2 billion. So a lot of lessons learned there along the way. But, a ton of changes in terms of ownership and CEOs. And quite frankly, I've been asked to leave my position as CFO for twice in my career now. And so I would say the game changer lesson there learned is that life goes on. As you would expect, there was a range of emotions, and, I value the professional lessons that I've learned along the way. But I had to realize that I wasn't completely washed up, and
sure.
Women, we struggle with confidence as it is, much less having events like that just reshape our whole career. But it has been a great journey for me. I have been able to, experiences 0 to 2 billion in revenue and all steps along the way in terms of growing and scaling a company. And then the last organization I served in, we were roughly an $8 to $9 billion revenue company. So, but I still drew from those experiences, I still do today, from those experiences of trying to just get scale in an organization, and when do you add the right resources at the right point in time? And those are some very valuable lessons learned, not to mention the, personal lessons of, you go through these changes of ownership and CEOs and so forth and leadership, and you just, life goes on.
Yeah. And obviously there's a lot of M&A happening in healthcare right now and in many markets and industries across the world and across the country. As someone who's been through that M&A process, and you understand what it means to move through, those phases, do you have any other recommendations or takeaways or lessons learned for other women and executives that might be going through that with their organizations right now?
Yeah, I would say to be flexible. You should have positioned yourself as somebody who is critical either to the ongoing operations or to transitioning the company through a period of change. And so, really just to be flexible and to take what you can from it in the sense of learn what you can during this period of time. You may not, and try not to be fixated on, okay, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for me? But because it's meant a lot of different things to me over the years in various situations. But the most important takeaway is, what did I learn during this situation? And how could I just make it successful? If it meant for me that I was going to be there for 6 months or 7 months, how was I the best partner to people around me? And how did I, make a difference while I was there? Yeah,
that's excellent. Appreciate that. Thank you. So, obviously you've had a lot of experiences. We've talked about some of those through Deloitte and through M&A. What would you say inspires you the most, truly?
Well, let's see. I will start that to answer that just with I have the worst habit of I read a lot, but I have 8 to 10 books going on at any one point in time.
Wow.
People around me nuts, but I am all over the place when it comes to reading. So that's kind of the backstory. But the one thing that's consistent in my life is my faith, and I do read the Word of God every day. It truly inspires me. For me, it's alive, it's active, it refreshes my soul, it gives joy to my heart. And so I am consistent in that one area when it comes to reading, and otherwise I'm all over the place. But that is my 100% my inspiration.
Great. What do you have one book right now that you'd recommend to our viewers and our audience? Like a leadership book or one that is inspirational?
Well, let's see. I am, like I said, all over the place. I'm reading about the life of Joseph, and he was an Old Testament individual who was a leader in some really difficult circumstances, and it's kind of it's portraying his character in that way as a leader. And then I'm also reading a book about homesteading because we have a farm and some chickens.
Well, you really do it all.
So it's all over the board, but I do enjoy it.
Thank you. All right. Well, so who is someone that impacted your life the most? And I'd like to ask that in work and maybe in life in general, or maybe that's one person. But really curious, who really impacted you in your career and in your life?
Yeah, I've had some incredible professionals that have surrounded me in my career. There are so many that have just been, role models for me, and just very impactful. There are so many people I could pick up the phone and say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that from a professional standpoint? And so for that, I'm very thankful. There was a lady, her name's Claire Gulmy, who was my mentor for many years and a competitor, which is so Nashville.
Oh, wow.
Your competitor as your mentor, but she was just amazing to usher me through some very difficult times. And then personally, I would say my son, he has taught me one of the best lessons on, he's very relational. And when you speak to him, I always say to him that he has listening eyes. And so when you speak to him, you know he's listening. You know you're valued and you're heard. And I always said, if I could just replicate that, you know, and what an incredible gift to be heard. Yes. And he makes you feel that way. Now, don't get me wrong, he's horrible about texting and he's horrible about calling his mama back sometimes. Sure. But when you're with him and you're speaking to him, you know, those listening eyes, he's hearing you.
Well, I think that's really good and amazing that that's your son. But, you know, a lot of what we face and challenge at work and in business is communication and active listening and some of that emotional intelligence. And it sounds like your son has that in spades. But listening eyes and active listening and being relational and being heard, you know, that's the concept here, right? So I appreciate that very much. Perfect. Well, I know we're getting close to our time here, and this has been great. But as we wrap up, final question, you know, what is your favorite word and why?
Yeah, I would say grace. I think in my mind, I'd like to think that that I give it more than I need, but in reality, I need way more grace in my life than I could ever give, and thankful to be surrounded by people who freely give it, and so I'm gonna say grace.
Well, it's very positive, and I think that integrates nicely with your servant leadership concept, right? I mean, I think that goes hand in hand here.
I think we have to be
that's perfect
and give lots of grace.
Well, that's the way of the world, right? Absolutely. Well, Teresa, this has been great. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your inspirational words. And thank you everyone who is tuning in today, our audience. We appreciate you. We'll be sharing this link in for the podcast after the event, so you can listen later. And be sure to tune in for our next Be Heard conversation at the same time on February 23rd with Rachel Carpenter. She is CEO of Intrio. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.